And away we go. Back to moneyballing blitzball with nerd numbers, and this is really more of just playing with a fun game of how many goals can I score in the very first game that you are allowed to play. So as a reminder, this is the very first opportunity you actually have to play blitzball that is not storyline driven. You have to play one game of blitzball against the Luca goers for the storyline, and then after that it's a mini game you can play on your own. But a hack that I showed in my last video is that in that game against the Luca goers, you were able to power level, and I power leveled Waka and Dado such that they're just absurdly good. And as you can, or not Waka, Letty and Dado. Waka retires. That's the unfortunate part about power leveling in that game is that of your offensive players, Waka, Titus, Dado, and Letty, Waka retires, so you can't get him until you get the airship. He unretires pretty easily, like most professional athletes. You just ask him if he wants to play, and he says sure. And Titus actually exits the game early, so you are unable to, use the same tricks to power level him. But Leto and Daddy are plenty, and because they're power leveled, you can essentially score at will. As soon as you get the ball with either character in any reasonable scenario, you can just shoot, and they're going to score. And I wanted to see the maximum of this. Where the money ball aspect comes in is, the cold hard numbers behind how many goals you actually are capable of scoring. First number to keep in mind is 15 seconds. If you win the very first face-off at the beginning of the game or the half, you can score in 15 seconds. If the opposing center comes right up the middle and meets you, you can score in about 23 seconds. And if this is the key, I get to 13 goals, which is a new record for me. I get to 13 goals in this half, and that is because Virja, the opposing center, breaks a overloaded word, but he goes to the left after the face-off, and Dado intercepts him because I have Dado in mark mode, which means he goes straight at Virja as soon as he's able to. Him going left doesn't actually increase or rapidly decrease an important number to keep in mind, which is interception time. How much time takes place between when the face-off happens and when you actually stop them. That's the key point, is when you intercept a player and they have to break to you, the game clock stops. But what does actually happen is Dado is so ridiculously fast that he gets far enough up that the ball doesn't take as long to travel, and that's how I'm going to be able to get 13 goals here. An unfortunate reality that I did discover is that basically all of the starting centers of every team are pretty slow. They all have about a speed of 60. The one question I have is there a way, woohoo, 13, is there a way to convince them to do what Virja did for most of that half, which is to go left? In fact, you can see that half, he passed the ball twice, which adds 24 seconds. So that's at least one more score, possibly two. And the question is the AI manipulatable? I haven't found that yet. I've started asking questions on forums, and I'm very interested. I mean, something I could potentially see is it appears that oftentimes when the opposing center does a specific action, they're very deliberate. They kind of repeat it. You'll see Virgil keeps coming up the center, and then at some point in the game he starts bringing to the left. Actually, that's later. That's when I actually get 25. So the question is there a way to kind of reset the random number generator to convince them to, go left, go right, whatever, and then once they've made that decision, is there a way that you can keep them in that decision? Because that's really the only way we're going to be able to break kind of what I'm seeing as my upper bound here, 12 or 13 goals and a half, because so far every time I've played them at some point, yeah, that's obnoxious. I could have gotten to 24 had he been nice and just broke there, but he tried to pass. But yeah, I basically have been stuck between 12 or 13 because we actually have to wait for the opponent to pass a couple times, and that adds about 12 seconds. So, you can see if you're scoring in 20 seconds, every time that they break kind of reduces the chance that you get at least one more goal in, and that's the hope. So long term, one of the other things is going to be AI manipulation. Can I convince the opponent to do specific things? And we might be stuck in a thing with my power level here, such that I'm just not going to be able to convince them, because I think I have seen at lower levels that they are convinced, want to break if they think they've got a chance, and you can kind of trick them with if you have a tackle, like a tackle 2 or a tackle 3 or something, that gives you extra power. So like if your block's really good but your tackle's meh, but then you happen to have a tackle 3, they might be convinced to try and break even though they shouldn't. So the optimal strategy may not in fact be to power level all the way to 99, and that was definitely fun. And as I mentioned, I'm pretty sure I have some unofficial records in most goals scored and a half for sure. Most goals scored in a game, and then in this one, if you were going to call it going for a record, it would be most goals scored in a spliced game. And very transparent about what happens. You see, I reset multiple times, and the benefit is in the Steam version of Final Fantasy X, it auto saves, and it auto saves basically the start of the half, so you're able to reset and take a save point. So what I'm doing here is not possible on a PlayStation 2, but it is possible on the Steam version. And so you kind of get into other interesting questions. On one of my lost recordings where I was just kind of grinding and talking about stuff, you end in weird questions about what constitutes legal and cheating and things like speed runs and high scores, etc. And obviously this is a freaking silly one, a turn-based game that's really more based on rate than anything else. I'm not worried about any record books or anything, but one of my kind of contentions is the hardware in game behaving as expected. And since the game does auto save, meaning that you are able to restart from there, it's not quite the same as a main save state splice. Because for those that don't know, in a lot of like Nintendo games, the random number generator is hugely important for how fast you're able to go. And the only way to get certain scores would be if you essentially got an absurdly good amount of luck. I was watching a Mike Tyson's Punch Out one, and it was like 2%, right? You for to actually get the conditions to beat an enemy in a certain amount of time required like them doing this one action which happens 1/4 of the time, and then doing this other action which happens 1/8 of the time, etc., etc. So that's really the only way. And some people have made fake speed runs in those environments by saving the game using an emulator, resetting. But the question here becomes, this game automatically saves. That's built into the Steam version of Final Fantasy X. Is that like a main? Is that like a splice, or is that actually just using the game as expected? I have no complaints just restarting the console at the beginning. Because one thing you can't annoyingly do is you can't really lock in your opponent in Blitzball because it's random after each game, and there's no way to back out to force it to be the same opponent. So that's actually useful in some regards, because if you're looking to, say, maximize the number of goals you score in a season, there are certain opponents you might not want early on, the Albed Sykes, and so if you see them, you can reset. So from a reset to get the right random number generator for the right run, I don't necessarily see this as problematic as splicing via save state and an emulator, but who knows. Anyway, I'm about to score 25. We'll be back at this with more rates, etc. And then actually we'll probably start doing things with like free agents and such, because to kind of get higher is going to require some more fun shenanigans.